All right, so some further thoughts on the pass. I like the question. I liked your question about the index finger, whether it should be here or not here. But before we get to that, I mean, this is one of the big questions about the pass, obviously. Um, there are some parameters that need to be defined for a somewhat more serious discussion about the pass. I recently saw Paul Wilson do this bit on the Unreal sessions, and my feelings towards Paul Wilson are somewhat ambivalent. And in it, he did this routine, and he said, "Well, and now you do a pass," and he did some sort of a pass while he's sitting at the table, and he goes, "Well, usually I do this standing up because the pass looks better when you stand up." This is obviously true, but for someone who wants to be such a big card mechanic as Paul Wilson wants to be one, that's a silly thing to say, because obviously if you're playing cards, you're sitting at the table, you're not standing up. So the parameters of doing the pass is as you're sitting. Anyone can do it as you're standing up. Again, going back to Erdnase, a slight turn of the body or a dip of the hands for a conjure, it's an easy thing to do. The question is not, can you get away with it? Of course you can get away with it. You can get away with the Herman pass or any other variation thereof. The reason why the pass is such a hard thing to do is precisely because you are sitting down. One of the other great ideas of Erdnase that have swept over in the magic world is the resourceful professional failing to improve the method changes the moment, which is true. But the holy grail of it is, if you're not changing the moment, as people look on your hands. So also the last thing before I get into actual techniques that I wanted to say is, nowadays there isn't really an opportunity to do a classic shift, because if you're dealing as a 21 dealer, what you have is a leaf hop. So you have, let's say this is the cut card, and you have your stack underneath, wherever you hold a break underneath, and you offer the cards to be cut. The partner will cut the cards below the break, and you just take everything above the break and you cut the cards this way. There isn't a need for that. If you're a poker dealer and there isn't a dealing machine there, which a shuffling machine, which typically is the case, you're cutting the cards yourself. So you can just throw in a brief and cut at the brief. There you go. The conditions in Erdnase's time were such that was not a cut card. Somebody cuts the cards, you pick up the cards, and then you have to go back. Just as a little background, it's really just much like stacking. If you have shuffling machines, obviously you can be the world's greatest stacker. If there isn't an opportunity for you to do it, well, you can't do it. But with the pass, having said all of this, nevertheless, as you sit down, you want to be able to do the pass. As far as this finger goes, it depends on what year you ask me. There are some years, I mean literally some years, where I think the first finger ought to be curled around. It might be better this way. And there are other, I mean, there's advantages and disadvantages to both. The disadvantage to having the first finger curled around this, well, there's two disadvantages. If you have the first finger curled around this is not typically how you deal. You have to do it in a dealing grip. So it's not the most economical way to go from here to there, but it can be done. It can be done well. The disadvantage to having the finger here as opposed to under the deck is that it shoots out. So I learned when I first started learning the pass, I learned this from David Carey, and his big thing was, if you're going to do the pass, this finger here should stay in contact with this packet. This way it doesn't shoot out. And also, because it's done so fast, you can't keep track of this finger. So you have to think. There's something that you have to think that should happen. For example, in this case, what should happen is you should feel, if you don't have it underneath, you should feel this finger touch the other hand and or touch this deck. If you do this, you know the finger is not shooting out, but you have to be consciously aware of this finger going under and touching the hand and touching this packet. Again, I'm not going to bother do anything for the camera, because we agree on the camera everything looks great anyhow. But this is one of the things. So This eliminates this flash, but there are still a few other flashes that you need to take care of. One thing that I've played around with quite a bit in recent years, somewhat more recently, is the idea of doing an all-around square up. And if you do an all-around square up, there's got to be a reason for it. There has to be an outer reality. The outer reality, and this is, I call this more or less of a fingertip square. The outer reality should be this. You just, you're just doing that. You're tapping the side of the deck just to square it up. This is the outer reality, and you can do this in the actions of a pass, but you have to think about what you want to do. You only have to think about the outer reality. If you're thinking about doing a pass, and you know this of course, if you think about doing a pass, it'll be too slow. Which is, by the way, thank you very much for the flattering comments about my turnover pass, but I never ever think about it. I don't know if it's good or bad. That was obviously very bad. But I just, if called upon, I just do it. I don't know how I do it. I just figure the way to do it, it shouldn't take you any more time than it takes you to turn over a deck of cards. To me, that's the secret of a turnover pass. I don't care where the other fingers go. As long as it doesn't take you any more time to turn the cards face down than it would ordinarily, the speed should do it. I don't worry about this finger at all. The one thing I want to say about the turnover pass is that again, Al Ackerman showed me, or told me, he said, this thumb here should lever up the deck. So if you do this, it should look okay. I don't know if it looks okay now, but again, I don't ever worry about doing the turnover pass. I don't do it the way I do it, breaking it down for you. I just know that it absolutely flies. I have no problem with it. The thing about having, like you do, the cards in an Erdnase script, that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think the object of the pass to me is to make it as open as possible. Of course, the more you cover it, and all of the Herman pass variations, you cover if the cards get covered, it's invisible, but not necessarily imperceptible. It's the same thing as doing this envelope second. It's invisible, but you can't see the top card either. It's not illusory. I mean, I think there's a difference between invisible and illusory. This is invisible, but not necessarily illusory. This one here, if you do this, it should be illusory. It's not invisible, but it should give the illusion that you're dealing the top card. And with a pass, it's the same thing. With a classic pass and its variations, it should be illusory. So anyhow, one of the things that I've been playing with is this all around. By the way, what I also like is the Jennings circular pass. That's good. It's very good. But again, the back of the hand covers the action, so it doesn't have to be done very quickly. If you do, and this is from David Carey, that's David Carey's circular pass. I should probably do this with the card face up. It's a classic pass, but it's done in the action of turning the deck. And if you do this with the first finger here, you're also covering a lot, clearly. But as the cards get turned around, and it's natural to have, in this case, by the way, in this particular case, the first finger ought to be curled underneath it, because you're doing this almost like an all-round square up cleanse, an all-around square up. I mean, an all-around square up comes first, whether you use it for a cleanse or anything else, that's beside the point. But it's an all-around square up. So in this case, of course, it makes sense to have this first finger underneath it. A further advantage of having the fingers curled, much like the finger on top or the finger underneath it, is you get some sort of a retention of vision thing going, because you can see this part is being touched, and now it changes while it's being touched, as opposed to a color change where you go with your hand over the whole thing. You're not going with your hand over the whole thing, which is why one of the things that you can use pass for, of course, is for a color change. And if you're going to go for a pass that's burnable, it's not for a control. Of course, I use it for a control all the time, because it certainly works as a control, but it's not worth the time and effort that you put in there for a control, because double undercutting will work just fine as well. So if you're gonna do it, you should work on some sort of retention of vision thing, and then you're gonna have something where, you know, where it's worthwhile to do this. For example, this. Actually accidentally passed to the bottom, whatever. Another thing that I've worked on is this tapping notion, and again, I find that an all-around square is nice. To do it 180 degrees, not 360, but 180 degrees. The cards turn, maybe it's a 360, I don't know. But you're doing this, and then you just tap the cards. But in your mind, as far as speed goes, oh, it's bad, but anyhow, you see me do it, you know I can do it. The idea is that in your mind, you're just thinking you want to tap the cards. And if you just did tap the cards, it shouldn't take any longer. So you always have something to compare it to. This is what it looks like when you don't do anything, and if you do it, it shouldn't take any longer. That's at least the speed that you need. That's the speed you need for the whole thing. And if you can do it, if you can do the outward actions, and within it you do the pass, then the speed is probably okay. Now another thing about the pass is, obviously, I mentioned this last time, is that bad angle. That is the worst angle. Now if you look onto this, no matter how fast you do it, it will be visible. You can see you cannot possibly be so fast that you can't see that. So you need to cover that. I mean, your hand happens to be opaque, so you want to use the opaqueness of the hand to cover this weak angle. There's one angle that needs to be covered. The easiest classic pass that I know of that can be done well, and that's worthwhile doing, it's also the only decent pass in this whole Richard Kaufman bit on the pass, is the half jiggle pass. And the half jiggle pass, this is the jiggle pass where the full jiggle pass, it's just a classic pass on the cover of a jiggle. But the half jiggle pass, I don't know what it's called then, is where you actually do this. So both halves are disengaged. You're that far away. But you do this in this sort of a thing. It's just forward and back. But what it does is that your arm, even if you're that far away, your arm covers this. And if it's a fast motion, obviously you don't have to do it quite that far, but you could. And if you just, well, what it does is, the distance between the packets is such that the packets are completely apart. They are this far away, and then you come back. And for some reason this is totally invisible, because, and it's also not jerky. That's the other thing about a pass. It shouldn't be jerky, it should be soft. There are two extremes, and I'll give you both extremes. One is the fastest and the hardest pass, and this is more of an exercise that I came up with, an exercise just for me. I was thinking to myself, what's the fastest I can make them transpose? And I wasn't worried about this thumb or this thing or anything else. If it's just speed, you have to pull up the lower packet and you have to pull down the upper packet. And if you pull down the upper packet as hard as you can, and if you pull up the lower packet as hard as you can, it's just speed. And you shouldn't, and this is sort of the, I think Ken Krenzel calls it the stroboscopic pass. And it's also a question of tension. You go this way, and then you just extend all your fingers. It's almost like it explodes. And if you do it like this, I think this, I know it looks great on the camera, we talked about that, but I think it also looks, this one didn't, but I think it looks good in real life as well, because you're not worried about any flashes, you're just going straight for speed, it's just pure speed. Now as far as soft is obviously the complete opposite, where you don't want to hear anything, where apparently you can move fast. It's that. I think that's, to me, there's no riffle in there, because a riffle is always, and again, in this case I leave my first finger extended, because it's there to receive the cards as they come back. And then if you, in the end, you take that first finger and tap the top. So your first finger is there for a reason, and it looks just soft. There, it's the object for me to make this as soft as possible, where nothing happens. There's no riffling, there's no jerky motion, nothing of the sort. A last idea, and again, all of these ideas, if you're interested at all, you have to play around with yourself. There isn't a perfect pass that's great for everyone. Everybody who's seriously interested in the pass has to have their own perfect version. Anyhow, you know this. You have to play with it until you find something that suits you. One last thing that I do play around with is this notion where you stand them perpendicular, and then you get back into a parallel to the ground sort of thing, and as they turn face down, you do the pass. So the outward motion, there's always an outward motion that's also against this thing that can be done with the hands at rest. I don't think it can be done with the hands at rest. It can be done. I've seen this Doc's Coltec switch, but he's covering the cards, but there's almost no perceptible motion. There's a lot of covering. But in a motion as entirely quantum card table routine, this is also quite soft, and the speed comes by itself. The speed, you don't want this to be visible, obviously, but there the speed, I think, takes care of this. Also the initial perpendicular position excuses this finger. So if you just did this, your finger would be extended, and then your finger would naturally curl around the deck. So this is not, in this case, I don't think it's a tell. So if this is in the center, it's sort of an in-between thing. It's sort of fast and it's sort of soft at the same time, because a dribble is okay. So you go from here to there, and that's nice as well. So those are a few variations, a few ideas really. These are just ideas for you to play around with. And again, when I do this in real life, I just do whatever I think feels right at the moment. Whatever. It's one of those things. If you analyze it, you have to analyze it at home when you practice or whatever. But when you do it, you have to have it in haptic memory. You do whatever you think is right. So it's the idea of to create a certain instinct with that move. That's it for right now. Please feel free to ask any questions whatsoever about the whole thing. Just something that I play around with a lot. That's all I can think of for right now, but thank you.